The lawyer's office felt like a tomb. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages of Dad's will, each one heavier than the last. "This has to be wrong," I muttered under my breath, but the words were there in black and white. Nothing. For me. Just charities I'd never heard of. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. How could he do this? After everything. The room spun, the faint smell of old books and polished wood suddenly suffocating. My chest tightened, every breath, shallow and sharp. Tears burned my eyes, but I blinked them back, refusing to let anyone see me break. Not here. Not now. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. All those years of silence between us. Was this his final message? That I didn't matter? A clock ticked somewhere in the background, mocking me with its steady rhythm while my world unraveled. The lawyer cleared his throat, sympathy heavy in his voice. "Ms. Hayes, are you all right?" But how could I answer that? No, I wasn't all right. Nothing about this was all right. And yet, something inside me whispered, "Find out why." If you've ever felt invisible or betrayed by someone you loved, you need to hear this story. It's raw, real, and unforgettable. Subscribe now to uncover what happens next. I'm Addison Hayes, Addie to anyone who knows me well enough to care. I'm 32, stubborn as hell, and carrying more baggage than I'd ever admit out loud. My life has been a patchwork of trying to prove myself, to my dad, to my mom's memory, even to strangers who don't know the first thing about me. Growing up in Willow Creek was like living inside a snow globe, beautiful on the surface, but shake it just a little and everything falls apart. That's what happened when Mom died. Dad changed after that. Closed off, distant, throwing himself into work and volunteering at every church function or community event he could find. He wasn't running toward something. He was running away from the grief that consumed him. And me? I got left behind. Dad, Richard Hayes, wasn't always this way. Before Mom passed, he was the kind of guy who'd show up at your door with coffee if you looked sad, who'd fix your broken fence without being asked. But after she was gone, it was like someone flipped a switch. He became obsessed with fixing things, as if doing good deeds could somehow undo the pain of losing her. The problem was, he stopped seeing the people around him, including me. It didn't matter how many times I tried to talk to him, to bridge the gap between us. He'd nod absentmindedly, his mind already somewhere else. And then there's me. I moved to Chicago for work because staying in Willow Creek felt like drowning in memories I couldn't escape. I built a life there, a decent job, friends I cared about, but it never quite filled the hole Mom and Dad left behind. Maybe that's why finding out I was written out of Dad's will hit so hard. It wasn't just the money, it was the confirmation of what I'd feared all along, that I wasn't enough for him, that whatever I did, no matter how hard I tried, it would never be enough. But here's the thing about me, I don't give up easily. Even when the world feels like it's crumbling around me, I dig my heels in and fight. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's desperation, but I can't let go of the idea that there's more to the story. That Dad's silence wasn't rejection. It was something deeper, something I need to understand. Because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what went wrong. And I won't survive another unanswered question. You've met people like us before. You might even see pieces of yourself in our struggles. People who ache to connect but keep getting pushed away. Who carry wounds they didn't ask for and fight battles no one else sees. If you want to know how far we'll go to find answers, and ourselves, stick around. This story isn't over yet. The lawyer's office smelled like regret, old wood polished to a dull shine, mingling with the faint scent of vanilla drifting up from the bakery below. It was the kind of place where time slowed down, each creak of the floorboards echoing like a heartbeat you couldn't ignore. Sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, casting long shadows that danced across stacks of leather-bound books and framed diplomas. But none of it felt warm. The air was too still, too heavy, pressing against me like an invisible hand. Outside, Willow Creek stretched out in shades of gold and amber, autumn painting the streets with fallen leaves that crunched underfoot. Church bells rang every hour on the dot, their chimes carrying a weight I used to find comforting. Now, they just reminded me how much everything had changed. The town square bustled with life, kids chasing each other around the fountain, couples sipping coffee at the cafe. But inside this room, it all felt distant, like watching a movie through frosted glass. Back home, Dad's study carried its own kind of heaviness. The desk groaned under years of unpaid dues, stacks of papers, empty coffee mugs, and a lamp that flickered when you touched it just right. His chair squeaked as I sat down, the leather cracked and worn from hours spent staring into space or scribbling notes he never shared. Every object whispered stories, the clock ticking steadily on the wall, the pen he always chewed on during, phone calls, the photograph of Mom tucked into the corner of his mirror. Her smile was softer than I remembered, her eyes full of secrets she took with her. Then there was the shelter, the one funded by money I didn't know I'd given. Walking through its doors felt like stepping into a dream. The hum of fluorescent. Lights buzzed overhead, mixing with the murmur of voices and the occasional bark of a dog. Posters lined the walls, cheerful reminders of hope and second chances. But what struck me most was the smell. Not antiseptic coldness, but warmth. Like soup simmering on a stove, like fresh laundry drying in the sun. It made me think of Mom, of days before everything broke apart. These places weren't just backdrops. They were alive, breathing alongside me. They held pieces of who we were and who we'd become. And now, sitting here surrounded by echoes of the past, I realized something terrifying. The answers I needed weren't waiting for me. I'd have to dig them up myself, no matter how much it hurt. If you've ever wondered what lies beneath the surface of loss, or wanted to see someone fight for truth against all odds, you'll want to hear what comes next. Why did he leave me nothing? That's the question that won't stop clawing at my brain, keeping me awake at night, haunting every moment of silence like a ghost I can't escape. It wasn't just the will. It was what it meant. All those years of trying to prove myself, to make him proud, only to find out that in the end, I didn't even matter. At least, that's how it felt. He left everything to charities I'd never heard of, organizations with names I couldn't pronounce, places that had nothing to do with me or our family. Nothing to show for the life we once shared, or tried to share, before Mom died and everything fell apart. But here's the thing. Why would Dad ignore me completely? Was it punishment? Did he think I abandoned him when I moved to Chicago? Or was it something worse, something deeper, uglier, that I'm too scared to face? Because if it wasn't punishment, then what was it? Guilt? Shame? Some twisted attempt to honor Mom's memory without including me in it? Every time I try to answer these questions, I get stuck on this image of him sitting alone in his study, writing letters he never sent, making decisions that cut me out of his life, like I was a mistake he wanted to erase. And maybe that's the part that hurts most. Not the money, not the betrayal, but the idea that he could look at me and see someone he didn't want anymore. And now there's this other layer, this impossible twist I can't wrap my head around. The charities he funded, they were paid for with my money. Money I didn't even know I'd given. Years ago, after Mom passed, I rerouted part of her inheritance into local causes because I thought it's what she would have wanted. I didn't think twice about it. I just did it and moved on. But now, finding out that Dad poured himself into one of those same charities, volunteering week after week, year after year, how do you process that? Was he following my lead without ever telling me? Using my actions to fill some void I couldn't touch? Or was he mocking me, silently judging me for being better at helping others than I was at fixing things between us. The worst part is, I don't know which version of him to believe in. The man who loved me but couldn't say it, or the man who resented me and chose to push me away. Both options hurt more than I know how to handle. But here's where it gets real. If you found yourself in my shoes, staring at a will that erased your existence, what would you do? Would you walk away? Let anger consume you? Pretend none of it matters? Or would you dig deeper? Risk unraveling everything you thought you knew about the person you loved most in the world? Because that's where I am right now. Standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that no matter which way I jump, I'm going to fall hard. Every unanswered question feels like a punch to the gut. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he reach out, write back, pick up the phone just once and say my name like it meant something? Why leave me drowning in silence while he built this whole other life I wasn't invited to? The shelter they're running, it's good work, important work. But how am I supposed to feel about it when it's built on pieces of me I didn't even know I gave? What happens if I pull the plug? Am I destroying something beautiful or reclaiming what's mine? If you've ever wondered what it feels like to be invisible, to pour your heart into someone only to realize they've already written you off, you'll understand why this cuts so deep. This isn't just about money or wills or charities. It's about love and loss, and the desperate need to know you mattered to someone. So tell me, if it were you, what would you do next? The first real crisis hit me like a freight train, and I didn't see it coming. Not really. It wasn't just the will or the charities, or even the fact that Dad had left me out of his life in ways I couldn't comprehend yet. No, this was something sharper, more immediate, cutting through all the swirling emotions until there was nothing left but raw panic. See, after the lawyer's office, after I'd sat in my car gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands went numb, I decided I needed answers. Not later, now. So I started digging, following the trail of those mysterious charities listed in Dad's will. The first one on the list was a shelter downtown called Haven House. I figured if anyone knew why Dad had poured money into their cause, and why my money seemed to be funding it, they'd have some kind of clue. Walking into Haven House felt surreal. The air smelled faintly of bleach and coffee, and the hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like white noise you can't quite tune out. There were posters everywhere, bright colors with messages about hope and second chances, but none of it made me feel better. Instead, I felt smaller, like an intruder stepping into someone else's world without permission. A woman greeted me at the front desk, her smile warm but cautious. "Can I help you?" she asked, tilting her head slightly as if trying to place me. For a moment, I thought about turning around, walking away before things got worse. But then I remembered the way Dad's handwriting looked on that will, cold, impersonal, final, and I forced myself to speak. "I'm Addison Hayes," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to sound steady. "My father, Richard Hayes. He donated a lot of money here. I wanted to know why." Her expression shifted instantly, from polite curiosity to something softer, almost sad. She nodded slowly, gesturing for me to follow her into a small office tucked away behind the main room. The walls were covered in photos of smiling families, kids holding balloons, volunteers handing out food. Every image felt like another piece of evidence pointing toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. Once we sat down, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. "Your father did incredible work here," she began, her tone careful, measured. "He came every week, sometimes twice, helped renovate the kitchen, organized fundraisers, mentored some of our residents." Her words trailed off, leaving space for me to process what she wasn't saying. He'd been part of this place in ways I never imagined, ways he never shared with me. But then she dropped the bombshell, the thing that sent my stomach plummeting straight to the floor. "Actually," she said hesitantly, glancing at a folder on her desk, The initial donation that kept us afloat years ago. It came from you. Me? No, that couldn't be right. I hadn't given them anything, at least not directly. But then it hit me, like a punch to the gut. Years ago, after Mom died, I'd rerouted part of her inheritance into local causes because I thought it's what she would have wanted. I signed papers, filled out forms, moved money around without really thinking about where it went. And now, sitting across from this stranger in a shelter I barely recognized, I realized I'd unknowingly funded the very place Dad chose to pour himself into, instead of me. My chest tightened, each breath shallow and uneven. This wasn't just coincidence. It was cruel irony wrapped up in guilt and regret. I left Haven House reeling, my mind racing faster than my feet could carry me. How could I have missed this? Why hadn't Dad told me? What kind of man takes his daughter's money and uses it to build a new life while shutting her out of his own? Each question burned hotter than the last, fueling a fire inside me that refused to die down. By the time I got home, I was shaking. Not from sadness anymore, but from anger. Anger at him for keeping secrets, at myself for not seeing the signs, at the universe for letting this happen in the first place. And still, the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was knowing I couldn't undo any of it. Whatever choice I made next, whatever path I took, I'd have to live with the weight of what I'd uncovered. If you've ever stood at the edge of a decision that feels impossible, if you've ever wondered whether love is worth fighting for when it hurts this much, you'll understand why I couldn't walk away. Because deep down, beneath all the rage and confusion, I knew one thing for sure. I had to keep going, even if it destroyed me. For a moment, just one fragile, fleeting moment, it felt like things might actually make sense. After the bombshell, at Haven House, I spent hours pacing my apartment, replaying every word the director had said, trying to piece together some semblance of clarity from the chaos in my head, and then it hit me. Maybe Dad wasn't ignoring me. Maybe he was honoring Mom's memory through my actions, without ever realizing how much it would hurt. The thought came unbidden, soft and hesitant, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. What if this wasn't rejection but a twisted kind of love? What if, in his own broken way, he'd been trying to connect with me by following the path I'd started years ago? It gave me hope, a flicker of it anyway. Enough to keep me moving forward instead of crumbling under the weight of everything I'd uncovered. That night, I dug out an old box from the back of my closet, the one filled with mementos from Mom's life. Inside were photos, letters, ticket stubs from trips we took before she got sick. As I flipped through them, I found something unexpected. A note she'd written to me, scrawled on the back of a grocery list. "Addie," it read, "never stop giving people second chances, even when it's hard." Her words felt like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of despair. For the first time since reading Dad's will, I let myself believe that maybe there was more to the story, that maybe I wasn't as invisible as I'd feared. The next morning, I went back to Haven House. This time, I didn't go looking for answers. I went looking for purpose. The director greeted me warmly, her smile less guarded now that she knew who I was, or rather what I represented. She showed me around, introducing me to volunteers and residents alike, each face carrying its own story of struggle and resilience. There was Maria, a single mom working 2 jobs to get her kids back. James, a veteran battling PTSD. Little Lily, who clung to her stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. They weren't just names or faces. They were reminders of why I'd donated in the first place. Seeing them made me feel lighter, like maybe my money and Dad's efforts hadn't been wasted after all. By the end of the day, I left feeling almost hopeful. Almost. Because even as I told myself this could be enough, that I could forgive Dad for his silence if it meant saving lives, something gnawed at the edges of my mind. Something small but persistent, like the hum of electricity in an empty room. It started with a question the director asked casually, as we parted ways. "Do you think you'll keep supporting us?" At first, I brushed it off, nodding absently. Of course I would. How could I not? But later, sitting alone in my car, the question lingered, growing heavier with each passing second. Keep supporting them. With what? My inheritance was already gone, rerouted into causes I barely remembered funding. If I wanted to continue, I'd have to start over, from scratch. And that meant making choices I wasn't sure I was ready for. Could I really walk away from the life I'd built in Chicago? The stability I'd fought so hard to create, just to pick up where Dad left off? Or worse, what if I couldn't afford to stay involved at all? What happened to Haven House then? To Maria and James and Lily? For now, though, I pushed those thoughts aside, clinging to the fragile peace I'd found. I told myself I had time to figure it out, that everything would work itself out eventually. But deep down, beneath the surface-level calm, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on shifting ground, that whatever security I felt right now was temporary, a mirage waiting to fade the second I looked too closely. If you've ever trusted in something only to wonder if it's about to slip through your fingers, you'll understand why I couldn't fully relax, because no matter how much sense it made, no matter how good it felt to help others, part of me kept whispering, what if this isn't real? What if it all falls apart again? Just when I thought I'd found a foothold, the ground beneath me gave way again. It started innocently enough, or at least as innocent as anything could be in this mess. I decided to visit Dad's desk one more time, hoping maybe there'd be something I missed before. Some scrap of paper, some unfinished note that would explain why he did what he did. But instead of answers, I found something worse. Letters. Dozens of them, stacked neatly inside the bottom drawer where I never thought to look. Letters addressed to me. My hands trembled as I pulled the first one out. The envelope was worn, like it had been handled too many times, and my name was written in Dad's shaky handwriting. My heart pounded as I opened it, half expecting, well, I don't know what I expected. An apology, a confession, something that would finally make sense of everything. Instead, I got this. Addie, I'm sorry. You deserve better than me. That was it. Just those few words, followed by silence so heavy, it felt like the room itself was closing in on me. I tore into the next letter, then the next, each one cutting deeper than the last. You're stronger than I ever was, one said. I wish I could tell you how proud I am, another read. And then, the worst one yet, you're better off without me. Better off? How could he think that? How could he sit there writing these things while erasing me from his life? Each sentence was a knife twisting in my gut, reopening wounds I didn't even realize were still raw. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was protecting me, or punishing himself, or both. Either way, it hurt more than I knew how to handle. And then came the photos. Tucked behind the letters were pictures. Not of him volunteering at Haven House. Not of strangers smiling for the camera, but of us. Me and him. Before Mom died. Trips to the lake. Birthdays. Lazy Sundays spent sprawled across the living room floor with puzzles scattered everywhere. Memories I hadn't thought about in years. Moments I'd convinced myself didn't matter anymore. Except they did. They mattered so much it physically hurt to look at them. Here was proof he hadn't forgotten me. Proof he cared. Even if he couldn't say it out loud. So why leave me out of his will? Why act like I didn't exist? The questions swirled faster than I could answer them, until I couldn't breathe. Every breath felt shallow. Every heartbeat louder than the last. I wanted to scream, to throw the letters across the room, to burn them and erase the pain once and for all. But I didn't. I sat there, surrounded by pieces of him, pieces of us, and cried until my throat was raw. Because here's the thing about grief. It doesn't let you run away. No matter how hard you try, it finds you. It drags you back to the places you swore you'd never go, forces you to face the truths you've spent years avoiding. But the worst part wasn't the letters or the photos. It was realizing that Dad wasn't perfect. He wasn't some untouchable figure who always knew what to do. He was human, broken, flawed, carrying guilt heavier than anyone should have to bear. And somehow, knowing that made it worse. Not because it excused his actions, but because it didn't. He chose silence over connection, distance over love. And now, sitting in the middle of his secrets, I had to ask myself, what kind of man does that? What kind of father looks at his own daughter and decides she's better off alone? If you've ever wondered what happens when the people you love fail you, not because they want to, but because they don't know how to do better, you'll understand why this cut so deep. Because it wasn't just betrayal, it was loss, layered on top of loss, grief piled high until I couldn't see a way out. And still, I couldn't stop digging, because somewhere buried under all the pain was a truth I needed to find, even if it destroyed me. If you've ever stood at the edge of your own unraveling, desperate for answers but terrified of what you might discover, you'll know exactly why I kept going. The third crisis didn't come out of nowhere. It crept up on me, slow and steady, like a storm rolling in. By then, I thought I'd hit my limit. Letters, photos, secrets. How much more could one person take? But life has a way of testing you when you least expect it, pushing you until you either break or figure out who you really are. And this time, it wasn't just about Dad or the will or even Haven House anymore. This time, it was about me. The choices I'd have to make, the lines I might cross, and whether I'd still recognize myself on the other side. It started with a phone call from the director at Haven House. Her voice was tight, clipped, like she was holding back panic. "Addie, we need your help," she said without preamble. "We're facing foreclosure unless we can raise $50,000 by the end of the month." 50,000. The number hit me like a punch to the chest, stealing the air from my lungs. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a strangled noise somewhere between disbelief and dread. She went on, explaining how their funding had fallen through, how they'd been counting on donations that never materialized, how families would lose their safe haven if they couldn't come up with the money in time. I hung up the phone shaking, my mind racing faster than I could keep up. What was I supposed to do? I wasn't rich. I barely scraped together rent some months. My inheritance was already gone, funneled into causes I hadn't chosen and debts I couldn't control. So where was this money supposed to come from? From me? Sacrificing everything I had left for a place I barely understood? Or should I walk away, let them figure it out themselves, reclaim what little stability I still clung to? That's when the guilt kicked in, the kind that eats away at you until you can't think straight. Haven House wasn't just a building, it was people. Real people, with real lives hanging in the balance. Maria, James, Lily. They weren't strangers anymore. They were faces I'd seen, stories I'd heard, lives I'd touched even if only briefly. Could I turn my back on them? Could I live with myself knowing I'd walked away while families lost their safety net? But then there was the flip side, the selfish side, the part of me screaming that I'd already given enough, that I'd sacrificed too much for too long, for people who never appreciated it anyway, for a dad who erased me from his will after using my money to fund his redemption arc. Wasn't it someone else's turn to step up? Someone who actually had something to give? And yet, how could I not help? Mom's note flashed in my mind again. Never stop giving people second chances, even when it's hard. She'd written those words knowing life wouldn't always be fair, knowing love meant sacrifice sometimes, knowing forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was worth it. So what kind of person would I be if I ignored her advice now? If I chose self-preservation over doing what was right? Would I hate myself later? Would Dad? But here's the thing that kept me up at night. The question I couldn't escape no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. Who gets to decide what's right? Is it better to save Haven House, even if it means losing everything I've worked for? Or is it okay to walk away, to prioritize my own survival over someone else's? If you were in my shoes, staring down the barrel of a decision that felt impossible, what would you do? Would you risk everything for a cause you didn't ask for? Or would you protect yourself, knowing it might cost others their lifeline? I spent days wrestling with it, pacing my apartment until the floors creaked underfoot, replaying every conversation, every memory, searching for an answer I knew wasn't coming. Part of me wanted to believe I could find a compromise, some middle ground where everyone won. But deep down, I knew better. Life doesn't work like that. Sometimes there's no win-win. Sometimes you have to choose and live with the consequences. By the time the deadline loomed closer, I was exhausted, emotionally drained, mentally fried. But I also knew one thing for sure. I couldn't sit idly by while Haven House crumbled. Not because it was noble or selfless or any of the things people say when they want to sound good, but because it felt like the last piece of me worth fighting for. Because maybe, just maybe, saving Haven House wasn't just about them. It was about me too. About proving to myself that I wasn't as invisible as I'd always feared. About showing Dad and Mom that I hadn't given up, not completely. So I made the call. I told the director I'd cover the shortfall, scraping together every penny I had left, and then some. It terrified me, the idea of starting over from scratch, of facing a future I couldn't predict. But it also gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. A reason to keep going, even when everything else felt broken. If you've ever wondered what happens when you gamble everything on hope, if you've ever stood at the edge of ruin and asked yourself if it's worth it, you'll understand why I couldn't walk away. Because sometimes, the hardest choices are the ones that remind us who we are. The fourth crisis didn't just knock me off my feet. It hit like a tidal wave, pulling me under before I even realized what was happening. I thought I'd done the hard part. I thought covering the shortfall for Haven House would be enough to keep it afloat, that once I signed the checks and made the transfers, I could breathe again. That maybe, just maybe, I'd earned a moment of peace. But life doesn't work like that. It never does. And this time, it wasn't just about money or charity or second chances anymore. This time, it was about survival. My survival. It started with another call from the director at Haven House, but her tone was different this time. Panicked, frantic, like she was barely holding herself together. "Addie," she said, her voice trembling. "There's been a mistake." My stomach dropped. A mistake? What kind of mistake? She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully, then blurted it out. "The bank flagged your transfer. They're saying the funds aren't available." I froze. The room spun, every sound muffled except the pounding in my ears. What did she mean, the funds weren't available? I'd moved every penny I had into that account, emptied savings, liquidated assets, maxed out credit cards. There shouldn't have been anything left to flag. I stammered something unintelligible, my brain scrambling to catch up, but she cut me off. "We need the full amount by midnight tomorrow, Addie. If we don't get it, we lose everything. The building, the programs, the families, we lose all of it." Midnight. Tomorrow. 12 hours. 12 hours to come up with $50,000 I didn't have. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, my vision blurring as tears welled, up unbidden. How had it come to this? How had I let myself believe I could fix anything when clearly I couldn't even fix myself? Every choice I'd made since Dad's will felt like a house of cards collapsing around me. Letters, photos, secrets. They'd all led me here, to this impossible moment where failure wasn't an option but seemed inevitable anyway. And yet, the worst part wasn't the deadline or the money, or even the fear of losing Haven House. It was the guilt. The crushing weight of knowing that if I failed, it wouldn't just be on me. It would be on everyone who depended on that shelter. Maria, working 2 jobs to rebuild her life. James, fighting battles no one else could see. Little Lily, clutching her stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Their faces flashed in my mind, accusing and pleading all at once. What right did I have to give up now? To let them down after promising, implicitly or otherwise, that I'd save them? But how? How was I supposed to pull this off? I called everyone I knew, begged for loans, favors, anything. Friends, co-workers, distant relatives. I reached out to anyone who might listen, swallowing my pride with each desperate plea. Most didn't answer. Some said they were sorry but couldn't help. One laughed bitterly and asked if I'd lost my mind. By the end of the day, I was hoarse from talking, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Midnight loomed closer, relentless and unforgiving, and still I had nothing. Then came the low point, the moment I almost gave up. Sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled receipts, I realized I couldn't do it. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I sacrificed, I wasn't enough. Not for Haven House. Not for Dad. Not for anyone. The thought hit me like a freight train, leaving me gasping for air. Maybe walking away was the only choice I had left. Maybe letting go wasn't weakness. It was survival. Except, what about Mom's note? What about the promise I'd made? To myself, to her, to everyone counting on me, to never stop giving people second chances. Could I really turn my back now, when the stakes were highest? Would I ever forgive myself if I did? That's when the idea hit me, an idea so reckless, so insane, I almost dismissed it outright. What if I sold the one thing I had left? The house, Dad's house, the place where every memory lived, good and bad. Selling it would mean erasing the last piece of him I had. But it would also mean saving Haven House, and maybe, just maybe, finding a way to move forward without drowning in the past. If you've ever stood at the edge of ruin, if you've ever wondered whether love is worth the cost, you'll understand why this decision felt like standing on a knife's edge. Because selling the house wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, about forgiveness, about deciding who I wanted to be when everything else was stripped away. And as the clock ticked closer to midnight, I realized I didn't have the luxury of doubt anymore. This was it. The final gamble. The last chance to prove I wasn't invisible. So I picked up the phone and called the realtor. If you were in my shoes, staring down the barrel of a decision that could destroy you or save you, what would you do? Would you risk everything for hope? Or would you walk away, knowing you'd never look back? The clock ticked louder than ever, each second pounding in my chest like a drumbeat I couldn't escape. Selling Dad's house felt like ripping out the last piece of my foundation. But what choice did I have? Midnight loomed closer. Hours now, not days. And every moment, without resolution, tightened the noose around my neck. The realtor had promised to expedite everything, but promises were cheap when time was running out. I sat in Dad's study, surrounded by ghosts, his chair that still smelled faintly of leather and old cologne, the desk groaning under years of unpaid dues, the letters he never sent stacked neatly where I'd left them. They stared at me, accusing and silent all at once, as if daring me to go through with it. Was I betraying him or honoring him? Could I live with myself either way? Kept replaying the conversation with the realtor in my head. "It'll take at least 24 hours to process," she'd said, her voice calm but firm. 24 hours. That wasn't an option. Haven House needed the money by midnight tomorrow, not the day after, not whenever it was convenient. Families were counting on me. Maria, James, Lily. They weren't statistics. They were people whose lives hung in the balance. What kind of person walks away from that? But then again, what kind of person sells their father's home for strangers who might never even know their name? Every decision felt wrong, every path lined with thorns. If I sold the house, I'd lose the last tangible connection to Dad, the man who raised me, flawed as he was. But if I didn't, Haven House would crumble, taking dozens of lives down with it. And then there was the deeper question gnawing at the edges of my mind. Why did I feel responsible in the first place? Was this guilt driving me? Duty? Some twisted need to prove I mattered to someone, even if it was just myself. By late afternoon, the tension was unbearable. My phone buzzed constantly with updates from the realtor, reminders from Haven House, texts from friends asking how they could help. None of it eased the weight pressing down on me. I paced the room endlessly, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet like whispers of judgment. Outside, Willow Creek glowed orange under the setting sun, its beauty mocking me. How could the world look so peaceful when mine was falling apart? Then came the call I'd been dreading. It wasn't the realtor, it was the bank. Their tone was clipped, official, devoid of empathy. "Ms. Hayes, we've reviewed your account activity," the representative began, each word landing like a blow. "Due to irregularities, we're unable to release any funds until further verification." Irregularities? What irregularities? I stammered questions, begged for clarification, but they cut me off with bureaucratic jargon I barely understood. Bottom line, the sale wouldn't go through in time. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. I sank into Dad's chair, tears streaming down my face. This was it, the end of the road. Every gamble, every sacrifice, every ounce of hope I'd poured into this fight had led me here, to a dead end. There was nothing left to try, nowhere else to turn. Haven House was lost. All those families, gone. And me? Broken beyond repair. Except, deep down, something refused to let go. A tiny spark, stubborn and defiant, whispering that giving up wasn't an option. That maybe, just maybe, there was one more card to play. One desperate move to make before the clock struck midnight. But what? Who could possibly save us now? If you've ever wondered what happens when you're backed into a corner, if you've ever questioned whether love is worth the ultimate price, you won't want to miss what comes next, because the answers are closer than they seem. Stay tuned to find out how far Addie will go to protect the people she loves. Subscribe now for raw emotion, unexpected twists, and a story that proves redemption isn't always what it seems. The decisive moment came faster than I expected, and it wasn't what I thought it would be. It wasn't a phone call or a miracle check arriving in the mail. It was me, standing in front of the Haven House board members at 11:30 p.m., 15 minutes before the deadline, my voice shaking but determined as I begged them to trust me, one last time. I didn't have the money. The bank had frozen everything. The realtor's promises were empty, and Dad's house was still technically mine. But I couldn't let that stop me. Not now. Not when there was still breath left in my body. I walked into the shelter carrying nothing but a folder of papers, documents showing the pending sale of the house, proof that the funds were coming, even though they weren't here yet. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the pages. Steady. but I forced myself to look each person in the eye, willing them to see how much this meant to me. "Please," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "Just give me until tomorrow morning. If the money doesn't come through by then, you can shut it down. You can take everything away. But please, don't do it tonight." They stared at me, their faces unreadable masks. Some looked skeptical, others pitying, a few just tired. The director sat at the head of the table, her expression torn between hope and resignation. She'd fought for me earlier, argued that we should wait another day, but the rest of the board overruled her. Now she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, and spoke softly. "Addie, we've already stretched this as far as we can. We can't ask these families to keep living in limbo." Her words hit like daggers, sharp and final. She wasn't rejecting me, she was protecting them. And part of me hated her for it, while another part understood completely. But I couldn't. Back down, not now. Not when every fiber of my being screamed that giving up wasn't an option. So I did the only thing I could think of. I laid it all out. Every secret, every wound, every mistake I'd made along the way. I told them about Dad's will, about finding the letters he never sent, about discovering that the initial donation that saved Haven House years ago had come from me without my knowledge. I told them about the guilt, the anger, the love I felt for a man who couldn't say the same back. I told them about Maria, James, Lily, their stories, their faces, the lives depending on this place. And finally, I told them about selling Dad's house, about choosing strangers over myself, because I believed it was the right thing to do, even if it destroyed me in the process. By the time I finished, tears streamed down my face, my throat raw from speaking too fast, too loud, too honestly. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy enough to crush you. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then one of the board members, a gruff older man with salt and pepper hair and a permanent scowl, cleared his throat. "You're asking us to gamble on faith," he said, his tone blunt but not unkind. "Faith that the money will come. Faith that you won't disappear once the dust settles. Faith that this place is worth saving." He paused, studying me like he was searching for something beneath the surface. "Are you willing to bet your life on that?" His question stopped me, cold. Was I? Could I stand here, exposed and vulnerable, and swear that everything I'd done, every sacrifice, every risk, wasn't just some reckless attempt to fix things I couldn't control? To prove to myself that I mattered. That maybe, deep down, I wasn't as invisible as I'd always feared. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to say yes. But the truth was messier than that. Because this wasn't just about Haven House anymore. It was about me. About facing the parts of myself I'd spent years running from. About deciding whether love, real, messy, imperfect love, was worth the cost. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to fix this, or smart enough, or brave enough. But I do know one thing. Walking away isn't an option. Not for me. Not tonight." I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "So yeah, I'm willing to bet my life on it. Because if I don't, I'll lose more than just this place. I'll lose myself." The silence that followed felt endless, stretching taut like a wire ready to snap. Then the director stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "We'll wait," she announced, her voice firm despite the tremor underneath. "Until tomorrow morning. That's all I can promise." The other board members exchanged glances, hesitating before nodding reluctantly. One by one, they agreed. Relief flooded through me, so intense it nearly knocked me off my feet. But it wasn't victory, not yet, just a stay of execution. A chance to fight one more day. As I left the meeting, the clock struck midnight. Technically, we were past the deadline, but somehow it felt like time had stopped altogether. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, biting at my skin like a reminder that I wasn't done fighting, not even close. Because now came the hardest part. Waiting. Hoping. Praying that the universe, or fate, or whatever force governed moments like this, would step in where I couldn't. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to stake everything on hope, if you've ever asked yourself how far you'd go to protect the people you love, you'll understand why I couldn't walk away. Why I wouldn't. Because sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought with fists or weapons. They're fought with hearts wide open, bleeding but unbroken. And I wasn't ready to break. Not yet. Just when I thought I'd used up every ounce of hope, just when I was sure the universe had decided to leave me hanging by a thread, the unexpected happened. It came in the form of a knock on my apartment door at 6 a.m., a time so early it felt like the world hadn't fully woken up yet. My heart raced as I stumbled to answer it, half expecting another bad news delivery or some bureaucratic official, here to tell me the sale had fallen through completely. But instead, standing there in the dim morning light, was someone I hadn't seen in years. Uncle Greg. Uncle Greg wasn't really my uncle. He was Dad's best friend from college, the kind of guy who showed up for holidays and disappeared for decades in between. He looked older now, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with wrinkles that told stories of hard living. But his eyes were sharp, focused, and they softened slightly when he saw me. "Addie," he said, his voice rough but warm. "We need to talk." I ushered him inside, confused and wary. What could he possibly want? Had Dad left something else behind? A secret account? A hidden stash of cash? Or worse, had he come to tell me the house couldn't be sold after all? We sat down at my tiny kitchen table, the sun creeping over the horizon outside, casting long shadows across the room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Uncle Greg leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and dropped the bombshell. "Your dad didn't mean to hurt you," he began, his tone measured but heavy with emotion. "He loved you more than anything, but he made mistakes, big ones." His words caught me off guard, not because they were surprising. Dad's flaws weren't exactly a secret, but because Uncle Greg sounded like he carried them too. Like he'd been carrying guilt alongside grief for years. "There's something you don't know about your mom's inheritance," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "Something Richard never told you." My stomach twisted into knots. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Uncle Greg hesitated, then pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and slid it across the table toward me. "This belonged to your mom," he said quietly. "She gave it to me before she passed, told me to hold on to it until the right time. I think this is it." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, Mom's handwriting unmistakable, and a key. The letter was short but devastatingly clear. "Addie," it read, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I need you to know the truth. Your father didn't handle my estate properly. He lost most of it. Gambling debts, poor investments, pride getting in the way of asking for help. I wanted to protect you both, so I set aside a separate fund. It's yours now. Use it wisely, and forgive him someday. He's only human." The room spun. My breath hitched in my throat. All this time, all the anger, the betrayal, the questions, I'd been wrong. So horribly, painfully wrong. Dad hadn't erased me from his will out of spite or indifference. He'd done it because he thought he owed me better than what he had left. Because he believed I deserved a fresh start, free from the mess he'd created. And Mom Mom had known. She'd planned for this, protected me even in death, leaving me a lifeline I didn't realize I needed. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Forgiveness wasn't supposed to feel like this, like relief mixed with regret, joy tangled up with sorrow. But it did, and suddenly, selling the house didn't seem so impossible anymore. With the funds Mom left me, Haven House would survive. Families would stay safe. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally let go of the past without losing myself in the process. If you've ever wondered how far forgiveness can take you, or how life's biggest surprises often come when you least expect them, you won't want to miss where this story goes next. Subscribe now for twists that change everything and moments that remind us why we keep fighting, no matter how broken we feel. The days that followed Mom's revelation felt like waking up from a dream I didn't know I was trapped in. Everything shifted, not suddenly, not cleanly, but slowly, piece by fragile piece. The truth about Dad's mistakes, about Mom's quiet protection, changed the way I saw everything. It wasn't just about Haven House anymore, or even about money or legacies or second chances. It was about me, about forgiving myself for carrying guilt that wasn't mine to bear, about letting go of the anger that had rooted itself so deep inside me I couldn't tell where it ended, and I began. I went back to Dad's house one last time before finalizing the sale. The air smelled the same, old wood and faint traces of his cologne. But it felt different now. Lighter somehow. Like the weight I'd carried into every room had finally lifted. I walked through each space slowly, letting memories wash over, me without drowning me this time. His study still held stacks of papers, unread books, the desk chair creaking when I sat down. But instead of seeing neglect or distance, I saw effort, the messy, imperfect kind. He hadn't ignored me because he didn't care. He'd pushed me away because he thought he wasn't good enough. And maybe he wasn't. But neither was I. Neither are any of us. In the corner of his desk drawer, beneath the letters, he never sent. I found something else. A small photo of him and me at the lake, taken years ago when I was just a kid. We were laughing, water splashing around our ankles, sunlight catching the edges of our smiles. On the back, written in his shaky handwriting, were 2 words. My girl. Just those 2 words, but they hit me harder than anything else ever had. They weren't an apology or an explanation. They were love. Flawed, complicated, human love. And for the first time, I let myself believe it. Selling the house wasn't easy, but it wasn't unbearable either. With Mom's funds securing Haven House's future, I didn't need to rush the process. Instead, I took my time packing up boxes, sorting through old photos and trinkets, deciding what to keep and what to let go of. Each item felt like a choice, a step forward rather than a step sideways. By the time the realtor handed me the keys, for the last time I felt lighter. Not fixed, not whole, but okay. Okay with the cracks. Okay with the questions that didn't have answers. Okay with being someone who loved deeply, even when it hurt. And then there was Haven House. Walking through its doors again felt like coming home in a way I hadn't expected. Maria greeted me with a hug, her eyes shining with gratitude I didn't feel worthy of. James nodded solemnly, his usual stoic demeanor softened by a smile. Little Lily ran up to me, clutching her stuffed rabbit, and handed me a drawing she'd made. Stick figures holding hands under a big yellow sun. "This is you," she said, pointing to one of them. "You saved us." Her words brought tears to my eyes, not because I needed validation, but because I realized she was right. In saving Haven House, I'd save myself too. But here's the thing I'll carry with me forever. Forgiveness isn't linear. It doesn't come all at once, wrapped neatly with a bow. It's messy and painful and ongoing, like tending a garden that keeps growing wild no matter how much you prune it. Some days I still wake up angry, at Dad, at Mom, at myself. Some days, I wonder if I did the right thing, if I gave too much or forgave too easily. But most days, I remember that none of us are perfect, that we're all just trying to find our way through the chaos, doing the best we can with what we've got. And maybe that's enough. If you've ever struggled to forgive someone, to forgive yourself, you'll understand why this journey changed me, why it taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when you don't know how. So I'll leave you with this question. What would your life look like if you stopped waiting for people to be flawless and started loving them anyway? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your stories of transformation, of learning, of hope. Because none of us are alone in this mess. None of us have to be. The day the sale of Dad's house closed, I stood outside Haven House and watched the sun rise over Willow Creek. It was one of those mornings where the world feels impossibly still, like time itself is holding its breath. The air smelled crisp and clean, the kind of freshness that reminds you life goes on, even when it feels like everything has stopped. I held the final transfer papers in my hand, proof that Haven House would stay open, that families like Maria's, James's, Lily's would have a safe place to rebuild their lives, proof that I'd done what I set out to do, even if it cost me more than I ever imagined. Walking inside felt surreal. The shelter buzzed with activity, volunteers setting up breakfast, kids laughing as they played near the front desk. Maria spotted me first, her face lighting up as she rushed over to hug me. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us." Her words should have felt heavy, but instead, they grounded me. This wasn't about me anymore. It never really had been. It was about them, about giving people a chance to heal, to start over, to find hope in places they thought were lost forever. And somehow, in doing that, I'd found my own way back too. Later that morning, the director called everyone together for a short meeting. She thanked the team, praised the community support, and then turned to me. "We couldn't have done this without Addie," she said, her tone warm but firm. She didn't just save Haven House, she reminded us why we're here in the first place. The room erupted into applause, and for once I didn't shrink away from the attention. Instead, I let myself feel it, really feel it, the weight of what we'd accomplished together. For so long, I'd carried anger and guilt like armor, protecting myself from pain by keeping others at arm's length. But now, standing in that room surrounded by people who mattered, I realized how much lighter it felt to let it go. Afterward, I wandered through the building alone, taking in every detail, the posters on the walls, the worn furniture patched together with duct tape and determination, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. This place wasn't perfect. It probably never would be. But it was alive, full of stories waiting to unfold, of second chances being seized, of love given freely despite the odds. As I passed Lily coloring at a table, she handed me another drawing. This one showed a big house with stick figures spilling out the door, all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "That's you," she said, pointing to the tallest figure. "And that's Daddy's house." Her innocence hit me harder than any adult conversation ever could. Because she was right. In some strange roundabout way, Dad's house had become hers. His mistakes, Mom's sacrifices, my struggles, they'd all led to this moment, to this place where broken pieces came together to form something whole. It wasn't redemption exactly, not in the traditional sense, but it was close enough. Close enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, love doesn't disappear when people do. Maybe it lingers, shaping the world in ways we don't always understand until later. When I finally left Haven House that evening, The streets of Willow Creek felt different too. Familiar but new, like seeing an old friend after years apart. The autumn leaves crunched underfoot, painting the sidewalks gold, and church bells rang softly in the distance. Life moved on, steady and sure, while I carried the knowledge that I'd faced the hardest thing I'd ever known, and survived. Selling Dad's house hadn't erased him. It had brought him closer. Forgiving him hadn't fixed everything. It had taught me how to live with what couldn't be fixed. Letting go hadn't meant forgetting. It had meant remembering differently. By the time I got home, the sky was dark, stars scattered across it like tiny pinpricks of light. I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by boxes from Dad's house. Photos, trinkets, ticket stubs, and for the first time, I didn't feel overwhelmed. Each object told a story, not just of loss, but of connection, of moments shared, imperfect as they were, of a man who tried his best, even when his best wasn't good enough, and of a woman who learned to forgive, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because forgiveness isn't about excusing pain. It's about making space for peace. If you've ever wondered whether it's possible to come out stronger on the other side of heartbreak, if you've ever asked yourself whether love can survive even when people don't, I want you to know this. It can. It does. Not perfectly, not easily, but beautifully, painfully, humanly. And sometimes the act of letting go is what saves us most of all. Life doesn't just reset after something like this. It shifts. For me, for Haven House, for everyone who'd been pulled into the chaos of those weeks. Things were different now. Not perfect, not tied up in a neat bow, but changed in ways that mattered. I could see it everywhere, in the way Maria greeted me with a smile instead of tears, in the quiet strength James carried as he rebuilt his life one day at a time, in little Lily's drawings that always included me now, no matter how far away I thought I was from her world. Maria became someone I didn't expect, a friend. She stopped by my apartment once or twice a week, bringing coffee and stories about her kids, sharing updates on their progress like they were victories we'd won together. "You saved us," she said again one evening, sitting across from me at my tiny kitchen table. "But you know what? You saved yourself too." Her words caught me off guard, not because they were wrong, but because they were true. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until she said them aloud. In helping Haven House survive, I'd found a piece of myself I thought I'd lost forever, the part that believed love wasn't wasted, even when it hurt. James started volunteering at the shelter once he got back on his feet. He helped organize supply drives, mentored new residents, and spent hours fixing things around the building, things Dad had worked on years before. Watching him reminded me of something important. Redemption isn't about erasing mistakes. It's about finding meaning in them. Every nail he hammered, every wall he painted, felt like proof that people can change if you give them a chance. And maybe Dad had been trying to do the same thing all along, in his own broken way. Lily, sweet Lily, kept drawing pictures of our makeshift family under that big yellow sun. One day, she handed me one where the tallest figure, the one representing me, was holding hands with another stick figure labeled Daddy. My throat tightened as I crouched down to thank her. "Who's Daddy?" I asked softly, already knowing the answer. She pointed to an old photo on the bulletin board near the front desk. A picture of Dad volunteering years ago, smiling brighter than I'd ever seen him. "That's Daddy," she said simply. "He helped too." It hit me then. Dad's legacy wasn't gone. It lived on in places I never expected, in the work he'd done at Haven House, in the lives he'd touched without realizing it, in the lessons I'd learned about forgiveness and imperfection. Letting go of his house hadn't erased him. It had made room for his memory to breathe again. Selling it wasn't betrayal. It was gratitude. Gratitude for the parts of him that still mattered, even when the rest felt too painful to hold on to. As for me, I started living differently. Not wildly or drastically, but intentionally. I called Uncle Greg more often, listening to his stories about Dad and Mom, piecing together the fragments of a past I'd tried so hard to forget. I visited Haven House regularly, not out of obligation, but because it felt like home. The director joked that I was becoming part of the furniture, but I didn't mind. Being there reminded me why I'd fought so hard in the first place. Not for recognition or absolution, but because hope is worth fighting for, even when it feels impossible to find. And then there were the letters, the ones Dad never sent. Instead of letting them haunt me, I started writing back. Not to him exactly, but to myself. Letters full of questions I couldn't answer, and truths I couldn't ignore. About love, loss, guilt, forgiveness. Each word felt like stepping closer to a version of myself I could live with. One who carried scars, but wasn't defined by them. One who understood that people aren't perfect, but they're still worth loving anyway. If you've ever wondered whether it's possible to rebuild after everything falls apart, if you've ever doubted whether pain can lead to growth, I want you to know this. It can. It does. Not easily, not quickly, but deeply. Painfully. Humanly. Because sometimes, the hardest battles teach us the most valuable lessons, and sometimes, the act of letting go is what saves us most of all. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that life doesn't hand you answers. It hands you moments. Moments to choose, to fight, to forgive. And sometimes, those moments don't feel like choices at all. They feel like walls closing in, forcing you to decide who you want to be when no one else is watching. For me, the hardest lesson wasn't about money or legacies or even second chances. It was about love. Real, messy, imperfect love. The kind that doesn't wait for perfection before it shows up. The kind that stays even when it hurts. I used to think forgiveness was something people gave because they were strong. But now I know it's something we give because we're human. Because carrying anger and guilt is exhausting. And eventually, you realize holding on to it only keeps you stuck. Letting go of Dad, and Mom, and even myself, wasn't easy. It wasn't clean or final, or wrapped up in a bow. It was painful, and raw and ongoing. But it was also freeing. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about making space for peace. About saying, this hurt me, but I'm not going to let it define me anymore. And then there's the lesson about legacy. Before all this, I thought legacy was about things. Houses, money, names carved into plaques. But now I know it's about impact. About the lives you touch, the stories you leave behind, the way people remember you when you're gone. Dad didn't leave me a fortune, but he left me Haven House. He left me memories of mornings spent fishing at the lake, afternoons fixing bikes in the driveway, nights sitting around the dinner table laughing until our sides hurt. Those moments weren't perfect, but they were real. And maybe that's enough. But here's the hardest truth of all. None of us are invisible. Not really. We spend so much time worrying about whether we matter, whether anyone sees us, whether the sacrifices we make mean anything in the grand scheme of things. But the truth is, we matter more than we realize. To Maria, I mattered enough to help her rebuild her family. To James, I mattered enough to remind him he wasn't alone. To little Lily, I mattered enough to include me in her drawings of happy endings. And to Dad, well, maybe I mattered more than he ever knew how to say. These lessons aren't just mine. They're universal. How many times have you held on to anger because letting go felt too hard? How often have you doubted your worth because someone else couldn't see it? How many times have you wondered if the love you give will ever come back to you? These are questions we all ask whether we admit it or not. But here's the thing. The answers don't lie in waiting for other people to change. They lie in changing ourselves, in choosing to show up, even when we're scared, in loving deeply, even when it feels impossible. So I'll leave you with this question. What would your life look like if you stopped waiting for people to be perfect and started loving them anyway? If you forgave someone, even yourself, for being human. If you trusted that the messiness of love is worth it, even when it breaks your heart? Share your stories in the comments. I want to hear them. Because none of us are alone in this. None of us have to carry our burdens by ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, the act of sharing is its own kind of redemption.